Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, it began with Apple, then Facebook, Spotify and YouTube, joining forces this week to kick the conspiracy theorist Alex Jones and his Infowars site off their platforms. But not Twitter, whose co-founder Jack Dorsey insisted Jones had not violated their rules, declaring he would not succumb or react to outside pressure.
Everyone's having their water poisoned. Everyone's having deadly vaccines pushed on them. Vegas is as phony as a $3 bill or as Obama's birth certificate.
Aliens, mass poisoning, the Queen's supposed conversion to Islam. Nothing is off limits or implausible for Alex Jones, the right-wing radio host based in Texas, who commands the attention of millions of Americans each week through his website Infowars.
Sandy Hook is a synthetic, completely fake.
He's known for spreading wild theories, including a debunked story that the Sandy Hook school shooting was fabricated and that the Democrats ran a child abuse ring out of a pizza restaurant. But it wasn't for fake news that Apple banned his podcasts on Sunday. A company spokesperson said it was for hate speech, though they didn't cite a particular piece of content. Facebook, Spotify and YouTube quickly followed on Monday, also citing hate speech. Today, Twitter came under fire for saying it would not be following suit. CEO Jack Dorsey tweeted Alex Jones had not broken the site's rules. It's not the first time the tech giants have disagreed on who they choose to kick off their platforms. Tommy Robinson, ex-leader of the English Defence League, was banned by Twitter in March this year, though he's still on Facebook and YouTube. Yesterday, Facebook-owned Instagram said Robinson had been wrongly deleted from the platform and was reinstated. Twitter has banned other right-wing leaders too, including the alt-right commentator Milo Yiannopoulos. So having created the space for these people to flourish, social media now gets to decide who keeps the oxygen to grow and who is cut off to wither and die. Well, I'm joined here now by the writer and comedian Andrew Doyle, who works on Jonathan Pye and other things, Deborah Collier, who's a digital strategist, and via the internet from San Francisco, Sandy Parakillis. He's a former Facebook employee who blew the whistle on the company's internal security practices. Andrew Doyle, you're worried by this. What bothers you?
Well, I'm fully aware that these are private companies, so they're entitled to do whatever they want. What worries me about it is whether they should. I mean, I would say that the degradation of politics and the polarisation that we've seen of politics is largely down to social media, and I think it's just getting worse and worse.
So aren't they just clearing their act up?
No, but they are effectively curating their sites now. They claim to be bastions of free speech. They say that they are there not to curate, but to offer a platform to have political diversity, all sorts of different opinions. But this changes if all of a sudden you start censoring particular political perspectives. And the suspicion has to be that this is ideologically motivated. I mean, they're under a lot of pressure from politicians, from certain sections of the media, to censor certain voices. And that isn't helpful, because these bad ideas are only destroyed when we air these ideas.
Deborah Collier, what do you think?
I think I'm all for freedom of speech. However, I think that the media, both media and technology platforms, have a responsibility to the general public to ensure that fake news is not spread. That's one thing. And two, also not to incite violence or prejudice against any minority group.
And you're happy to leave it to them to decide?
I think they should have good judgment and have a council that maybe, you know, looks at the kind of content. They should be monitoring the type of content that's out there.
Sandy Parakillis, having worked for one of these big social media giants, I mean, isn't it a bit weird that they all decided that Alex Jones had broken the rules on the same day? You know, there must be something else going on as to why they moved against him.
Well, they clearly, in terms of Facebook and YouTube, they were clearly following Apple's lead. And what that shows that there is not a consistent approach across all of these companies, nor is there, you know, consistent law in terms of, you know, what should be done and what the liability is for these companies. They've been shielded from liability, at least in the US, by the law, and that's why we have such a mess right now. I don't think freedom of speech is actually the right way of framing the issue. You think about newspapers and other media, they're liable for what they publish. And someone like Alex Jones was promoted actively by these platforms. They recommended him billions of times. And so that's the problem. They're actively pushing out this stuff, and yet they have no liability for what the content that they're pushing out as of right now.
And do you think ultimately they may have moved against him because of commercial pressure? That some of the people who spend money on these platforms are saying, oh, we don't like this.
There's that, and there's also regulatory pressure. So in the US, the person who wrote the law that protects these companies from that kind of liability came out just last week and said, the days that we consider these platforms to be neutral are over. So he made that very explicit statement that things are going to change. And I think things are going to change, and they are seeing that, but they don't have their act together yet. So, I'd encourage them to move a lot faster and think through how they would live in a world where they are liable for this kind of content.
Andrew Doyle, what would you accept as a form of regulation?
I would be
if you accept that there has to be some rules.
I would be very nervous about any form of regulation of these companies.
So just let everybody say whatever they think?
Well, I do believe that, because I think, are these the best people that we want to be deciding what is best for us to hear and what is not? I mean, these are big, faceless, unaccountable corporate machines, these big giants who are, the US is essentially a plutocracy. These people wield incredible political clout. I don't want them deciding what ideas I can read and what I can't. I don't want to be infantilized like that. I don't think it's helpful. And I think it gives a gift to people on the right, people like Alex Jones, because it creates a kind of martyrdom around them. It gives them this odd kind of credence that they really don't deserve.
Deborah Collier?
Well, I agree with what you're saying, but I do think that there has to be some kind of regulation if it's not self-regulating within the companies, if we don't have policies within the tech giant companies. That, in fact, it's to protect the reputation also of the tech giants themselves, like Twitter and Facebook. If they're seen to be allowing such content that hurts others or incites violence or causes other concerns, then that's not good for their reputation at all.
I think inciting violence but it's already illegal. I think the problem is when you talk about hurting someone's feelings, it is impossible to live in a free society where the possibility of offence is entirely diminished. That can never happen. I mean, we live in a country where we have the 2003 Communications Act, Section 127 of which criminalises anything that could be interpreted as grossly offensive, incredibly subjective terms. And I don't trust these companies or the state to make those distinctions.
Just pause it there for a second, but or stay there, if you will, because one social media platform which has taken a stand on Alex Jones and Infowars is, of course, Facebook. Now, on Monday, the company said it had taken down a series of pages associated with Jones because they glorified violence and used dehumanising language. But this programme, in conjunction with Channel 4's Dispatches, has discovered that the internet giant has failed to take down violent content, including a video of a small boy being assaulted by his stepfather. Last month, Channel 4's Dispatches reported on how Facebook moderates or fails to moderate content. One disturbing video that was shared tens of thousands of times showed a 3-year-old boy being beaten by an adult man believed to be his stepfather. Under Facebook's rules, videos like this can only be posted if they condemn the behaviour, the child is still at risk, and sharing the content could help identify the victim. In this case, it should have been removed in 2012, but Facebook moderators got it wrong. A senior Facebook official then told me, wrongly, that it had been taken down after we'd alerted them to it.
That material has now been removed. I want to be clear that that's not acceptable.
So when you say it's been removed, why is it still on Facebook right now? And last week, Facebook again insisted at an Irish parliamentary hearing that the video had been removed.
We removed this video as soon as Dispatches brought it to our attention. Our policies make it clear that videos depicting child abuse should be removed from Facebook if the child in question has been rescued.
But yesterday, it was still available. And when we flagged the video online, a Facebook moderator wrongly replied to say the content would simply be limited to over 18s and marked as disturbing, repeating the original mistake Dispatches had uncovered. So in the case of just one video of extreme content, Facebook seemed confused about whether to leave it up or delete it, then repeatedly claimed wrongly that it had been deleted. So what hope does it have of properly moderating what's on its platform? Let's go back to Sandy Parakillis. Oh, sorry, before we do that, in a statement, Facebook told us that different versions of a video can exist, which may not always be detected by our image matching technology, as is the case with this video. We've already removed hundreds of copies of the video and identified over 40 different versions to prevent it being shared. We will continue to remove this video and any versions of it as soon as we become aware of them. Let's go back to Sandy Parakillis. I mean, if we are going to let social media giants just effectively decide what's on their platforms according to their own rules. You know, here's another example which really is very worrying about their ability to do it.
Yeah, I think we need to frame this in terms of liability and money, because those are things that they really care about. The reason that they didn't rush to take down the video or the videos in the first place is because they're not liable and there's no financial penalty to them for not taking them down in a quick, speedy manner. So regardless of your feelings about freedom of speech, if you could apply some of the same laws that are applied to media companies in certain instances to these platforms, and people could sue for content that was libelous or caused harm, then the platforms would completely reorganize themselves to ensure that that kind of content wasn't pushed out to lots and lots of people. That's the ultimately the solution here.
I mean, Andrew Doyle, does your absolute freedom of speech extend to this kind of material as well?
Of course not. I mean, that's a film of a criminal act, and I think nobody would think that that was a positive thing at all. But it's a false equivalence, because we're talking about someone like Alex Jones, who is this sort of demagogue who rants about intergalactic vampires and gay frogs. This isn't comparable to someone putting up what is a criminal act. That's not. But it can
be framed, you see, within Facebook's rules. If you can put up a video like that and say, "Isn't this terrible? We should do something about it," and use it as part of a campaign. And in that case, you then make videos that you would think are completely unacceptable possible to stay up.
It can be framed in that way, but by the same token, and what has happened this week is they framed the banning in terms of hate speech. They've used this nebulous phrase, hate speech. They haven't said what it is specifically he's done. It's actually not the conspiracy theories, is it? It's something else that they won't specify, which is straight out of Kafka. They've just punished someone without actually giving the... And by the way, I should emphasise that I'm not pro-Alex Jones. I don't enjoy his work at all. I don't like that bombastic evangelical nonsense that he spouts.
You just don't like them.
I'm more uncomfortable with them deciding and policing speech. I think that's the problem for me.
Do you think it's possible, Sandy Parakillis, to design a regulatory system that would take in the internet? I mean, who would police it?
So one of the ways that this can be thought of is dividing up hosting content and distributing content, right? What is allowed on the platform versus what is actually actively pushed out to people. And in fact, several of the platforms, including Google and Facebook, have put this forward as a model. The problem is they haven't actioned against that because there's no penalty to them at this point because they're shielded from liability. But if you think about it that way, it's one thing to say, hey, Alex Jones can put up a video on YouTube, but it's a totally different thing to recommend it actively to literally billions and billions and billions of people. And that's where you get into the problem. These platforms have allowed Alex Jones to develop this huge audience, which enables the content that he's creating to create harm because it's reaching millions and millions.
We must leave it there. Sandy Parakillis, Andrew Doyle, and Deborah Collier. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you. The tech giants have taken a battering from politicians in the UK and the US recently for allowing untruths, hate and misinformation to roam free across their global platforms, with objection met by the tardiest of responses. But this week, finally, Facebook deleted American shock jock Alex Jones' Infowars site, and along with Apple, YouTube and Spotify, cast him out, deplatformed him. You might remember one of his more offensive allegations was that the Sandy Hook school shooting was faked. Here's a flavour of his typical outlandish style.
If you are receiving this transmission, you are the resistance.
Mainstream corporate media, with its dying audiences, its dwindling audiences, are now engines of censorship and harassment against those that try to actually follow the Constitution and restore our republic, and who try to then shut down all of their competition. They are now terrorist organizations, most of them on the communist Chinese payroll, which, by the grace of God, is now breaking.
So is this a key moment for the tech giants, how they now prepare to take responsibility as publishers for what they share with the world? Joining me from New York is Divya Narendra, a Harvard contemporary of Mark Zuckerberg, who reached a settlement with Facebook in a dispute over the original of the idea dramatised in the film The Social Network. And Jaron Lanier in Dublin, a virtual reality pioneer and author of 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. Good evening to both of you. First of all, Dividend Durendra, do you think this is a critical moment for the tech companies?
I mean, it's an important moment. I would say, you know, the issue that they're starting to come to terms with is, you know, what sort of objective standard to apply to, you know, the speech and content that's being, you know, promulgated on their platforms. And these are obviously huge platforms with billions of users that are global in scale. But I think what we're seeing in the Alex Jones case is just kind of maybe the tip of the iceberg is, you know, how are these companies going to start applying some sort of standard that dictates what content stays on, what content stays off, what's hate speech, what's libel, what's defamation. A lot of these areas are actually somewhat gray, even in a legal context. And I think it's interesting that Facebook went one way, Twitter went the other way.
Yes, but I mean, a month ago, you know, Mark Zuckerberg was defending keeping Infowars on. Things move quickly. Jaron Lanier, I wonder if you think this was an inevitable moment for the online world.
Well, you know, the problem is that it's not just that figures like Alex Jones are given access to the public. They would have had that anyway. It's that they're amplified in a particular way because the business models and indeed the valuation methods, everything about these companies depends simply on getting attention and holding people. And unfortunately, that motivates the worst in all of us. You see somebody like Elon Musk, or for that matter, Donald Trump, becoming kind of a jerk. And you might say, well, maybe they are anyway. I don't know. I've met them both. I think it's this medium that just is constantly fanning us to bring out our worst selves.
But you were an advocate. You were an advocate in the very beginning. I mean, in a way, you were a pioneer. You're one of the people that thought the internet was going to make the world a better place. Do you demur from that now?
I still maintain my idealism about the internet, and indeed you're right, I was there. The mistake we made is we created this space where the internet was so bare bones that there were inevitably going to be these giant monopolies that would be formed on it, and we probably should have put enough in there that there could be moderate-sized companies instead of these giant global ones to make up the difference. If it weren't for how the worst people are amplified, I would say I'm a free speech advocate. I don't want anybody shut down, but we have to, unfortunately, respond to this extraordinarily strange circumstance that we've gotten us into. So I don't see how they have a choice at this point.
But Divya, what do you actually do?
To be clear, there are moderately sized companies and platforms that are not the mega giants where people can still disseminate all kinds of speech with little to no filtering. My issue isn't, you know, like the fact that, you know, these platforms exist. I think the question is, you know, do we trust the company management teams to apply a standard, or should we, through legislation, sort of force a certain standard? But right now, I think the issue is that there is no real standard. You know, I think, you know, free speech is a very gray zone, and companies have the right to take content off if they want to. They can do that.
But it's so arbitrary. What you're saying just now is that it's so arbitrary. It's
arbitrary, yeah. I mean, I think Alex Jones is maybe an easier case because, look, the guy's facing multiple, you know, lawsuits right now, all centered around defamation. You mentioned Sandy Hook. That's definitely going to put him in a world of hurt, you know, pretty soon, and if it hasn't already done so. But there's so many borderline cases where, you know, you got to wonder, like, should social media companies get involved, or should they let the conversation kind of move forth? And until there's an objective standard, I think you're going to end up with a lot of confused people on both the left and the right, and there's not going to be, you know, a ton of consensus. So just one example, you know, take Obama when he was running for president. There were a lot of people who were, you know, pretty far right who were making claims that, you know, he wasn't, or that he was a Muslim, or that he wasn't a U.S. citizen or born in the U.S. Like, you know, is that hate speech? Should that be taken on or off? And that's, you know, and that was perpetrated through mainstream media, not just social media. So, you know, I think if you want to regulate what goes on social media, you kind of have to take media at large. And I think it's a really difficult thing to do right. And to Jaren's point, free speech is really important. So it's not something that, these companies should take lightly and do haphazardly.
But Jaren, yes, go on.
I have to disagree, and I wish I didn't have to, because I'd like to agree with your position, but the problem is there can be no objective standard. Let's just imagine for a second that it's a government instead of Facebook, because Facebook is functioning like a pseudo-government, like a global governmental layer, in that people have to petition it for basic ways that their lives work, right? Which is what we're talking about. If a government told everybody, you must be polite, you must be decent, you must tell the truth, we might all support those values, but we wouldn't want the government enforcing them with the police, because that would be authoritarian. These sources of goodness in society, where scientists tell the truth and police tell the truth, these things can only come about through these intermediate institutions, in my view, and those are precisely the things that were broken.
So you're saying the real world versus the online world. The real world has to interact with the online world.
No. The online world, see, Facebook's early slogan was move fast and break things. So what were the things that were broken? It was the power of publishers, the power of schools, the power of all these things that were the places that people could join voluntarily to adhere to standards and then promote those standards. There's no such thing as a single global standard for these kinds of things that can possibly work. Both the companies and the people and governments are an impossible dilemma. So can I just ask you very briefly, is it possible to police something that has 1 billion users? If you're asking me, I would say it's possible, but it shouldn't be done. It can only be done in an authoritarian model. And every time we complain to Facebook, we're pushing them towards an authoritarian posture. What we need to do instead is limit their power so that we don't have to do that to them.
Thank you.
I mean, there's no way Facebook can. Yeah.
I mean, that sounds pretty authoritarian to me right off the bat. I mean, I think if we're going to put the onus on, media companies to police content, but we can't figure out an objective standard in let's say, the real world, if we want to call it that, that is an inconsistency that just has to be sorted out.
Well, thank you both. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it
it's complicated, there's
right
no
there.
doubt, but...
I'm sorry, we're still running out of time.